The first thing Marcus Vale said to me that morning was not hello, not welcome, not even my name. He pointed at the folder in my hands and said, "Pick that up, stand over there, and only speak when someone asks you to translate." And the way he said it, in front of a room full of executives and international investors, made one thing very clear. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as someone who belonged in the background. 6 months earlier, nobody would have guessed I would end up standing in the corner of the most important meeting of my life wearing a faded jacket and carrying documents that could decide the future of a billion-dollar partnership. My name is Elena Brooks, and I learned something that day that I still carry with me. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who knows exactly what everyone else is missing. The conference room at Hawthorne International was the kind of place most people only saw in movies. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls, a view of downtown Chicago stretching across the windows, polished marble floors, and a long table where every chair seemed reserved for someone with a title bigger than their own name. There were lawyers, executives, translators, and a delegation from Europe who had flown across the ocean to finalize a massive business agreement. Everyone looked like they belonged there except me. At least, that was what Marcus wanted everyone to believe. I had been hired through a temporary staffing agency 2 weeks earlier. On paper, I was just another contract worker brought in to assist with translation and document organization. What nobody in that building knew was that I had spent nearly 15 years working with international contracts, negotiating language differences, and helping companies avoid expensive mistakes. But life has a funny way of changing your position overnight. 3 years earlier, my mother was diagnosed with a serious illness, and I made a choice most people around me didn't understand. I walked away from a major opportunity overseas because I wanted to stay close to her. Some people saw that as a step backward. I saw it as choosing what mattered. But choices like that come with consequences. My career slowed down, my savings disappeared faster than I expected, and eventually I found myself taking temporary jobs just to keep things stable. I never felt ashamed of it. Work is work. There is dignity in showing up. But Marcus Vale didn't see it that way. Marcus was the kind of man who measured people before they even opened their mouths. He looked at watches, clothing, job titles, and social status. He could walk into a room and instantly decide who deserved respect and who didn't. And apparently, my worn jacket and simple shoes had already answered that question for him. "Don't mind the hospital smell," he joked to one of the executives after noticing my old coat. "We hired someone from an agency list. Just a translator. She'll stay out of the way." A few people laughed quietly. I smiled because sometimes when you're embarrassed in public, your first instinct is to pretend you're not hurt. But inside, I felt that familiar pressure in my chest, that feeling of being reduced to something smaller than who you really are. The meeting started, and for nearly an hour I stayed silent. I organized documents, listened carefully, and watched every word being exchanged between the two sides. Then I saw it. Clause 9. At first, I thought I was mistaken. I checked the English version again. Then I checked the French version. I read the sentence slowly, once, twice, 3 times. My stomach tightened. There was a difference. A small one. The kind of mistake most people would miss because it was only one word. But that one word completely changed who carried the financial responsibility if something went wrong. I looked around the room. Everyone was preparing to sign. Marcus was smiling like he had already won. The lawyers were reviewing their notes. The executives were reaching for their pens. And I had a choice. Stay quiet and keep my temporary position, or say something and risk everything. I knew exactly what Marcus would think. I knew exactly what everyone in that room would think. But I also knew I couldn't sit there and watch people sign a contract that was written incorrectly. So I finally spoke. "Excuse me, there's a problem with Clause 9. The room went silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence. The uncomfortable kind, where everyone suddenly remembers the person they were ignoring is still there. Marcus slowly turned toward me. His expression changed from surprise to irritation. "I'm sorry. Did you just interrupt a negotiation?" I held the folder tighter. I believe there is an inconsistency between the two versions. Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked me up and down. Then he laughed softly. "You think you caught something our legal team missed?" His voice got colder. "Look around you. Do you really think this room is where you prove yourself?" I felt every eye turn toward me. He didn't even need to say the words directly. The message was clear. Know your place. "People like you don't come into meetings like this and challenge people who built this company," he said. "You were hired to translate, not to think." That sentence stayed with me, not because it hurt my feelings, but because it reminded me how easily people confuse someone's position with their value. I wanted to answer. I wanted to explain. I wanted to put the contract on the table and prove him wrong right there. But then I looked around and realized something. Nobody was ready to listen. So, I did the only thing I could do. I stepped back. I walked to the corner of the room and sat down quietly. And that was when a young assistant named Rachel Monroe noticed what had just happened. She had been standing near the coffee table, holding a tray, watching everything unfold. She wasn't important enough, according to Marcus, to have a voice either. She was only a junior assistant on a probationary contract. But unlike everyone else in that room, Rachel didn't look away. She walked over, picked up the contract, and started reading. And after a few seconds, her face changed because she saw the same thing I saw. The mistake was real, and now she had to decide whether telling the truth was worth risking everything. Rachel stood there holding the contract with both hands, and I could see the battle happening on her face. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, still trying to prove she belonged at Hawthorne International. I recognized that look because I had worn it myself many years earlier. That moment where you know something is wrong, but you're also calculating the price of saying it out loud. In a perfect world, telling the truth would be simple. But offices are not perfect worlds. They are places filled with fears, ambitions, friendships, and invisible lines that people are afraid to cross. Marcus noticed her reading the document and immediately frowned. "Rachel," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room, "put that down." She looked up. "I think there might actually be an issue here." A few people exchanged uncomfortable looks. Marcus smiled, but there was no kindness behind it. "You think?" He walked closer to her. "You still on probation. Remember? Don't throw away your future trying to impress someone who isn't even part of this company." The room became quiet again. Rachel looked down at the contract. Then she looked toward me sitting in the corner. I didn't say anything. I couldn't, but I think she understood. Sometimes people don't need a speech. Sometimes they just need to know someone else sees what they're seeing. Rachel slowly walked to the table and placed the contract in front of everyone. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. "The liability section doesn't match between the English and French versions. The responsibility has been assigned to the wrong party." Marcus immediately shook his head. "That's impossible." Our legal department reviewed it. Before anyone could respond, the leader of the European delegation, Adrien Laurent, reached for the document. Adrien had been quiet throughout the entire meeting. He was the kind of person who didn't waste words. He read carefully, turning each page slowly. Then he stopped. He looked at Clause 9. Then he looked at the French version. And suddenly, his entire expression changed. He placed his pen on the table and closed the cap. It was a small movement, but everyone noticed. "Nobody signs this agreement today," Adrien said. Marcus blinked. "Mr. Laurent, with all respect, my team has verified every part of this contract." Adrien didn't look at Marcus. He kept his eyes on the document. "Your team may have reviewed it, but someone else noticed what they missed." The room became tense. Marcus tried to laugh it off. "This is a minor translation issue. We can correct it after signing." Adrien finally looked up. "No, we cannot." His voice was calm, but there was something behind it. Disappointment. "A contract is built on trust. If we cannot trust the words on the page, we cannot trust the people asking us to sign it." Then Adrien turned his attention toward me, toward the woman who had been sitting quietly in the corner. "Elena," he said. My heart stopped for a second. I had not expected him to know my name. "Come here." I stood up slowly and walked back to the table. Every step felt strange. 10 minutes earlier, I had been treated like I didn't belong in that room. Now everyone was watching me. Adrien looked at me carefully and said something I never expected to hear. "I know you." The room froze. Marcus looked confused. "You know her?" Adrien nodded. 11 years ago, Elena helped my family during the most difficult time of our lives." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Adrien took a breath before continuing. "My wife was very sick. We were in a foreign country, surrounded by people we couldn't understand. Elena was our translator, but she did much more than translate words. She helped us understand doctors. She helped us communicate when we were scared. She stayed with us for 3 days when she didn't have to. And when I offered to pay her extra for everything she did, she refused." He looked at me with a small smile. "She told me, some things are more important than money." I looked down because I didn't know what else to do. I had almost forgotten that moment. To me, It was just something a person should do when another person needed help. But Adrian remembered it for 11 years. And now, standing in that conference room, he saw something nobody else had seen. Marcus had judged me by my jacket. Adrian remembered me by my character. I spent 11 years hoping I would have the chance to thank you, Adrian said. And today, I walk into this room and see you being pushed into a corner by people who don't even know what you are capable of. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody looked away. Marcus shifted in his chair. The confidence he had carried into the room was disappearing. Adrian handed me the contract. Show them what you saw. So I did. I opened the folder and walked everyone through the mistake. I explained the difference between the two versions. I explained how one word had been moved, changing the entire meaning of the agreement. The mistake wasn't just a small typo. It could have transferred millions of dollars in unexpected liability to the wrong side. $4 million. That was the potential cost of a mistake everyone had almost ignored. Marcus immediately tried to defend himself. This is being exaggerated. It's an easy correction. Adrian looked at him. No. What is being exaggerated is your confidence. The room went silent. Adrian continued. The problem is not only the mistake. Mistakes happen. The problem is that the person who found it was humiliated instead of heard. That sentence hit harder than any accusation, because everyone in that room knew exactly what had happened. They hadn't missed my warning because they didn't understand it. They missed it because they didn't think I was important enough to listen to. Adrian turned to the company executives. I will not continue negotiations with a firm that treats valuable people as invisible. Marcus stood up quickly. Are you seriously threatening to walk away over this? Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm not walking away because of a contract error. I'm walking away because of a leadership error. Those words changed everything. The executives began whispering among themselves. The legal team looked uncomfortable. Everyone knew the situation had gone far beyond a translation mistake. It had become a question of what kind of company Hawthorne International wanted to be. A few minutes later, the decision came down. Marcus Vale, the man who had controlled the room when he thought he was the most powerful person there, was removed from the negotiation team immediately. He tried to argue. He tried to explain. He tried to remind everyone of his years at the company. But nobody was listening anymore. For the first time that day, he experienced what it felt like to be ignored. As he walked past me, he stopped for a moment. I expected an apology. I expected him to admit he was wrong. But some people don't change just because they lose. He simply looked away and left. I watched the door close behind him. And strangely enough, I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved, because the point was never to embarrass him. The point was that the truth finally had a chance to speak. Later that afternoon, Adrian asked me a question that surprised me even more than recognizing me. Elena, with your experience, why are you working temporary jobs? I looked through the glass windows at the city below. I thought about all the opportunities I had walked away from. I thought about the people who told me I was making a mistake. Then I smiled. Because my mother is sick, I said. And I chose to be close to her. The room became quiet. I had offers in Europe. Good offers. The kind people dream about. But there are moments in life when a title doesn't matter. When being there for someone matters more. Adrian nodded slowly. And I realized something. Years earlier, he had probably made the same choice. The choice between success and the people you love. Then he looked over at Rachel, who was still standing near the wall, still trying to process everything that had happened. And you, he said, you almost lost your job today because you chose honesty over comfort. Rachel smiled nervously. I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing. Adrian smiled back. The hardest decisions are usually the ones that prove who we are. That evening, the contract was rewritten, reviewed, and signed correctly. But the biggest change wasn't on the paper. It was inside the people who had been in that room. Because everyone walked out knowing the same thing. The person standing in the corner was never the least important person there. She was the person everyone should have been listening to from the beginning. The weeks that followed changed more than just my position at Hawthorne International. They changed the way people look at the quiet people in the room. The ones who didn't speak the loudest. The ones who didn't wear the most expensive suits. The ones who sometimes stood in the background because life had placed them there, not because they belonged there. Rachel kept her job, but more importantly, she gained confidence. A few days after the meeting, she was moved into a permanent role with the international operations team. She told me later that before that day, she always thought speaking up was something only powerful people did. She learned that courage doesn't come from having a title. Sometimes courage is simply knowing something is wrong and refusing to pretend otherwise. As for me, I didn't become some overnight celebrity inside the company. Real life usually doesn't work like that. There was no dramatic standing ovation, no movie scene where everyone suddenly understood everything. But something better happened. People started asking my opinion. They started listening. And after years of feeling like I had to prove my value again and again, I finally worked somewhere that understood a simple truth. Experience doesn't disappear just because someone changes their job title. Marcus eventually left Hawthorne. I heard different versions of what happened afterward, but honestly, I stopped paying attention because the most important lesson from that day was never about watching someone fall. It was about seeing someone finally be recognized. Looking back, I still think about that conference room. I think about how close I came to staying silent. I think about Rachel standing there with a contract in her hands, scared but determined, and I think about how easily a room full of intelligent people almost made a very expensive mistake because they decided who deserved to be heard before they ever heard them speak. Maybe that's the part that stays with me the most. We all make judgments. Sometimes we judge people by their clothes, their jobs, their background, or the chair they happen to be sitting in. But the truth is, we rarely know the full story behind someone standing in front of us. The person we ignore today could be the person who saves us tomorrow. The person we underestimate could be carrying years of knowledge, sacrifice, and experience that we never bothered to see. So let me ask you something. If you were Rachel in that room, knowing your job was on the line, would you have spoken up? Would you have pushed the contract forward and risked everything because you knew the truth? Or would you have stayed quiet and protected your position? And what about Marcus? Do you think he was simply arrogant? Or do you think people like him are created by workplaces that reward power over humility? I want to hear your thoughts, because stories like this are not just about one meeting or one mistake. They are about the choices we all make when we see something wrong happening in front of us. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a loud voice. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carried by the person everyone else decided not to notice. If this story made you think about a moment when you were underestimated, share it in the comments. Someone reading your story might need to know they are not the only person who has ever felt invisible. And if you enjoy real-life stories about courage, unexpected victories, and ordinary people who prove their worth when it matters most, make sure to subscribe, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is not the one sitting at the head of the table. It's the one who had the courage to stand up when everyone else stayed silent.